Hello and welcome to the Merri-Cast, the show that puts you on the fast track to confidence in your leadership and entrepreneurial journey. My guest this week is Jonathan Bowman-Perks, MBE. Jonathan is a global leadership coach, author and broadcaster, working with CEOs and their top teams at some of the world's largest organisations. Now, I've known Jonathan on and off for about 20 years, and before even I had the pleasure of meeting him, he spent 20 years in the British Army, serving as Chief of Staff to one of its largest brigades. Those years shaped a leadership philosophy which was grounded in humility, resilience and calm under pressure. Lessons that stayed with him as he transitioned into senior roles at the likes of PwC and IBM. Today, though, Jonathan focuses on helping leaders navigate complexity and turbulence, drawing on insights from more than 400 interviews on his inspiring leadership podcast and his latest book, The CEO's Compass. The success of both is something that I'm very keen to emulate in 2026. As always, though, I asked Jonathan to go right back to the moments that shaped him as an entrepreneur, from early lessons in leadership to the challenges of transition and the experiences that continue to influence how he works with leaders today.
I think I learned about entrepreneurship and leadership at a very early age. 18 years old, arrived at the Royal Military Academy, Sandhurst. My mother was there at the door with me, and the Sergeant Major says, "Thank you, sir, I'm your mother now." And he took it from there. And I've just had a reunion, 45 years on, with all those 28 members of our platoon. And I've been out to Nepal, just come back a month ago, with General Himalaya Thapa and my best man at the wedding that when Lee and I got married 10 years ago. Errol Stewart is Jamaican. So it's a lovely grounding 18 years ago in the British Army. And looking back, it was the basis and the foundation for really setting me up as a leader for the rest of my life and as an entrepreneur, to be able to be a self-starter and to face problems, and boy, I've had a lot, and learn from them.
So it gives you this great grounding, and we often talk about what people learn in the army. I mean, you served as a chief of staff to one of the army's largest brigade. I mean, very few people would say they've had that kind of experience. What kind of leadership knowledge or wisdom does that give you?
I think the first thing was, behind me on the wall is my father's naval cap and my father's sword. He was 33 years old when he was killed flying and saving the lives of two other naval pilots. There's a story behind that for one other day. The point was, I really missed not having a father as I grew up, and my mother really respected him and saw him as the leader he was, a very humble man. Modesty was a big thing. Whenever I was telling my mother that I just won the Cyprus Double Mountain Marathon and set a world record for that, mother. And she went, "Yes, dear, that's very interesting. What did you have for lunch?" And you just didn't brag. She didn't want you to get too big for your boots. Humility, humanity, and humor, the three hums, was really part of her upbringing. As a chief of staff, you are running a brigade of, 40,000 people from the Scottish borders to North Lincolnshire, east of the Pennines. And you're working to brigade commander with a staff of 70 people in the headquarters. And it was my big break after the Army Staff College. So the Army must have spent, I reckon, £600,000 on my development. Well, you know, Trevor, as a coach yourself, that if you're trying to propose a coaching program for someone which might be £5,000, £10,000, £15,000, they go, "That's a lot of money." But if you think education's expensive, try the cost of ignorance. And businesses do not develop their leaders. They don't want to invest in them. They just want them to emerge from the egg. "Congratulations, Trevor, you've been promoted. You're now the chief marketing officer. Is there a training course for that?" No. Just learn on your way. And we expect you to know what to do. Yeah, I haven't got a clue. I remember way back at the beginning when I was being trained as an army officer in an 8-month program, they picked out some of the stars of the platoon to be the junior under officer, the cadet sergeant, and 3 corporals. I was one of the corporals who got selected, but they were looking at me to see if I should be the junior under officer. And they said, we're going to make you the company second in command. Come and stand in this tent here as they're digging all the defense works around the company positions, and off you go. And I went like, I sort of stood there a bit inadequate and looked around. I thought, I don't know what to do. Like, what do I say? And I hadn't got a clue. I fluffed it, absolutely fluffed it. Didn't become the junior under officer. He was a very fine man, Greville Bibby, who became a grenadier. He was a grenadier guard, and he became a brigadier. And he's a lovely man. He's a good friend of mine now, because he had that confidence of being at Wellington College, and he'd been in the cadets, and he had a bit of an idea. He'd even gone and done perhaps an attachment to the army to see what these kind of things are. So I think it's a really big mistake as an entrepreneur, as a leader, that you expect people by osmosis to suddenly know what to do in their job. And so you learn from people. And I think one of the big things that the army gave me was I had three in particular commanding officers, like CEOs, General the Lord Dannatt, as he ended up, the head of the British Army, Brigadier John Griffin, SAS, and General John Stokoe, Special Forces as well. A really courageous man who worked undercover operator. And they were like father figures to me. And what was wonderful at the book launch you came to, and you saw me mention General the Lord Dannatt, and that he became a bit of a father figure. And I looked to these people, and they've got feet of clay. They make mistakes. All of them have made mistakes and had difficult moments, as I have. So they're not perfect, and I don't think they are perfect, but I learned from some of the best. And I think the very best army officers, men and women, I was just talking to Wing Commander Jackie Wilkinson, who's going from the Royal Air Force into business, and she was there that night. She asked the question, if you remember. The very best officers do very well in business too. And there are some quite average people. Not many, because it's such a competitive process, and also you're constantly being trained and developed. And so I think there's a reason that the armed forces produce good leaders, because there's a lot of training and development, and there's a lot of rejection of those who are not good enough leaders, or they make a terrible hash of leading people, and maybe some people die. So that's fireable. You lose a job.
So at that moment where you made a terrible hash out of that, potential sort of promotion, I guess the thing that marked you out was what happened next, if you like, the sort of like the resilience moment. And so are you saying that those people at the very top, they not only have the kind of the discipline and the abilities in other respects in terms of the army, but they also, in a way, sort of have that sort of vulnerability to admit their mistakes and learn from them? Is that a fair comment?
10 words, 3 phrases. I was wrong, I don't know, and I need some help. And the good leaders I've worked for have the courage to say that, including the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander of the whole of Europe, General Sir Rupert Brown. And he came into one of the briefings and they went, "Oh, General, we're glad you're here. We're just preparing the presentation. What do you think about this?" And he sat in his chair at the back of the theatre. He put his legs on the row in front, leant back, and he goes, "Guys, I haven't got a clue. That's why I hire you to do the research for me and tell me what you recommend, and I'll choose the best option that you recommend to me." Oh, you're right. As if they expected him to have do this and do this. And people are often looking for this magic silver bullet. To be a successful entrepreneur, just do these 3 things and you'll always succeed. To be a great leader, do these 2 things, you'll always succeed. No, it's not like that. It was General Colin Powell, who was next door neighbor to my ex-father-in-law, the father of my first wife. And he wrote a lovely book, and it said, it worked for me in leadership and in life. So it worked for him, but it doesn't mean it's going to work for you, Trevor, or for me. So I think we must be very careful. I mean, I say this as someone who's just written a book. The reason I wrote the book about the CEO's compass and the 8 components is it's a framework. It's just a framework, and you've got to do your thinking within it. But it's just almost like you don't forget certain things. And because when I was under great pressure, so take out in Canada, commanding 140 men in 14 armored fighting vehicles, traveling at 40 miles an hour, which sounds very slow, but when you're bouncing across the terrain and there's rivers and there's valleys, that's very fast. You're wearing a respirator, you've got a nuclear, biological and chemical suit on, you're sweating in 40 degrees centigrade Canadian summer heat, You're looking through a little glass optic. You're on your radio set trying to encode a message to send out to the 14 while there's a live enemy firing back at you with lasers and taking out different vehicles. That's pressure. Or when you're, in combat, as friends of mine have been. I've been in operations, but I've never had to kill people in real life. And actually, I'm very grateful for that. In my 20 years of, I don't want to have had other people's blood on my hands, but I was prepared to, if saving my country and defending my country was required. I would kill the Queen's enemies, or the King's enemies as they are now. But I'm very glad that I didn't have to. But you learn a lot from being under massive pressure, and you have to have the resilience to stay uber calm. And I think what I learned from these great characters that I mentioned, they never got flustered. And there was chaos going on around them, and they were just super cool. And they went, okay, guys, quick check-in. Trevor, what do you think? Jonathan, what do you think? Okay, this is what we're going to do. You do this, and you do this. Come back and report to me. And if we lose comms, you have command, crack on, and you do that.
I'm just trying to find a metaphor that would adequately describe what it's like being around those people. And the one that sprung to mind there was, in the midst of this hurricane, you're right in the center, in the quiet bit, at the center of the hurricane. Is that what it's like to be with leaders like that?
It's in that calm spot at the eye of the storm. Yeah. And they never scream and shout. They have a steady, commanding voice. You can almost imagine them. I didn't know that they did it, but they probably did do it. Doing the sort of breathing in, breathing out, 4 seconds in, 6 seconds out, just to calm down the whole parasympathetic nervous system when everybody else is losing their heads around them. Well, in this particular case, that was the whole point. Indeed, it was almost part of the officer's modus operandi. There's bullets flying, people are being shot, and there was, again, Rupert Smith. He was on the radio. One of his soldiers afterwards said, "Boss, you got 40% burns, but yet you were on the radio. I didn't know you were still on the radio and you'd had 40% burns. You just gave command instructions, calm, just unruffled." And as you know, courage and calm is contagious, but so is panic.
Yes.
And this is the point when we look at leadership today and in 2026 and going forward, that we've got post-truth, populism and polarization going on. We've got lots of big egos, the age of the strong man. I won't mention any politicians because I particularly dislike them intensely. The point is, it's all about their egos. And that is the antithesis of everything I was brought up on, where actually when someone's done something good, they never brag about it. You'd never know who the guys were who were in the special forces because they don't brag about it. The ones who tell you, I was in the SAS. Yeah. And you go, he's speaking bollocks. He was never in the SAS. And you can look it up and find out that he's a complete charlatan. Or you occasionally get some sado who wears some false medals at a Remembrance Day, and he's never even been in the armed services.
I mean, I could have a whole podcast with you just about your army times, to be honest with you, because it's just absolutely fascinating. But with great reluctance, it's 20 years of your life, so it formed a fantastic foundation stone for everything that followed. Let's leave the army now. I want to know what it was like on the day you left the army and you stepped into consulting roles. You went to PwC, you were at IBM. What was that like? Did you have a sort of bit of an adjustment period, during that transition? And suddenly you were in this business world. I mean, what was that like, and what were you making of it on that day and shortly after?
Well, this is where I think anybody listening around the world, it's important you prepare for your transition. Planning and preparation prevents particularly poor performance, the 5 Ps. So I was at the Army Staff College. I came out the top 10%. I was with some really bright and capable guys who all went on to become generals. One became the Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe. And they were just a very bright, very capable group. So all boats rise on a rising tide. So I learned a lot from them. But I looked around them, I thought, am I good enough to be one of them? Because I worked for the head of the army, so I was his assistant. So I saw the very top of the top, and I thought, do I want to be one of them? Am I good enough to be one of them? Do I fit in? And the answer to all three was no. So I then thought, if I'm going to go into business as an entrepreneur now, what do I need to do? I need to do an exec MBA. I need to get some experience of what business life is like. And then I need to make a very gentle transition. So it's almost like stepping stones. I'm literally going from one step to the next. There's no big trauma. Almost like there's no ripples. It's a bit like this calmness. So the army at that time, I was one of a few guinea pigs, I think about 10 of us, who did the executive MBA through the Open University. And over 2 years, while I was chief of staff of this largest brigade in the army, I also, with two small children, did an exec MBA. And my ex-wife was also at the time training she was leaving the forces and she was trained to become a teacher. So lots of study going on in the family. They said, I've got this great job for you, Jonathan. This is the next job for you. And I went, actually, no, I want to go and work for the Army Management Consultancy Services, AMCS. And they went, what? Never heard of that. It's rubbish. It's a very bad career move. I said, no, it's a good career move, I assure you. Because they didn't know my career move was to prepare to leave the army. Because I thought I hadn't been promoted to lieutenant colonel on the first time, which is like the person who commands the regiment, or the second or the third. And so something had clearly gone amiss. And I found out years later with the data release of what's gone on that someone had stabbed me in the back years before, but they never told you. You know, I questioned this man's judgment. I mean, that's death in the army. If your judgment's questionable, I'm not sure what I'd done, but I'd clearly upset him. I don't actually remember the person. I think I met him once. But anyway, he made a decision which was career changing, but I carried on in the army, not realizing what that was. I'm very glad I had all that time in the army. I learned a lot, but it wasn't to be for me. And looking back now, I'm very pleased I did my 20 years, but I'm really pleased I became a leadership coach, a podcaster, an author, and a facilitator. It's my happy place. So I think for anybody making the transition and the change, you need to do the preparation. An exec MBA was brilliant. I started to meet lots of people in business. And then I applied to PricewaterhouseCoopers Consulting. I got in. I also applied to McKinsey. I didn't get in. It turned out I was dyslexic and I had this thing called dyscalculia, which is like can't do numbers. So on the sixth interview at McKinsey, I blew it. Luckily, the day before, I had the final interview at PricewaterhouseCoopers. And the partner asked me, Jonathan, if McKinsey offered you twice as much as us, what would you think? And I said, I think I feel undervalued by you. She said, oh, I like that one. You're in. Now, luckily, thank God she said that, because the next day I blew the PwC one when they went, Jonathan, last year, this supermarket made 82.75 million. This year, they're going to make 33% more. What's that? And I went, can I have a calculator? They went, no. In your head. Come on, in your head. Quick. Yeah. So anyway, a lot of people, they'll have doors that will close on them. I think that's great. Like it was not to be. My old Irish mother-in-law, Lee, my wife, her mother was such a character, Marguerite. And she'd say, Jonathan, what's meant for you will not pass you by. And if it's not meant for you, it will pass you by. So it wasn't meant to be. And I think I'm a great Stoic philosopher and Buddhist philosopher. I am a Christian by upbringing with a Quaker background. So how about that as a mix? but my hunger to learn from 2,500 years of wisdom is that control the controllables, your thoughts and your actions. That's all you can control. The other things are outside your control. And when something happens, you go, okay, what have I learned? What am I going to do next?
So I'm just seeing this fascinating fusion of this sort of army upbringing and a lot of these other influences, this insatiable appetite to learn things, as you're going along, and doors opening rather than closing. And did that mean that at this point then you're in consulting, were you thinking at that moment about your own coaching and leadership advisory sort of business? I mean, the one you're talking about at the moment is specifically targeted towards CEOs. I mean, did you choose to focus on this group, or did you just find yourself gravitating towards them or them to you?
It's a very, very good point you asked, Trevor. And here's the story. I was working for Penna with you. You and I were together, and it was lovely, that connection that we've kept. And it's so good to be on your podcast. So thank you. It's a real honor. And one of my clients, Deanna Oppenheimer, who was the CEO of Barclays Bank for whole of Europe, I was her coach and I was working with her board and a top team. And she said, Jonathan, do you realize that we're not hiring Penna, we're hiring you. So why don't you go on your own? Oh, no. I can't go on my own. I've always worked for big organizations, the military, PricewaterhouseCoopers, IBM. Penna was smallish, but still a sizable organization. I wouldn't be very good on my own. She said, how do you know? I went, I don't know. I mean, just like, I suppose I've been an entrepreneur. I suppose I could be an entrepreneur. And it really stayed with me and it kept churning round. And I thought, do you know what? I would be interested in going on my own. And also, I had a couple of other lucky breaks where I knew a couple of other people who were in some other big organizations that they were keen to get me involved. And I was on a bit of a roll. So it so happened that Gary Browning, who we both know and like, decided to restructure. And there was Graham Russell, who's a lovely man, who's probably you've stayed in touch with. He and I suddenly were shoved underneath another managing director. So the 6 MDs, he decided he was going to make 2 the big ones, and the rest of the 4 would report to them. And we went, no, that person's a peer of ours. We respect them, but we can't work for them. We can work to you, but why are you demoting us to work for another person? And we went, no, make us redundant. So by restructuring, he lost both of us. And we both went and set up our own businesses. So actually, Gary has remained a great friend. And I always say to him, thank you for that, because I wasn't happy at the time. I tried to make it work for 6 months. It clearly was never going to work because the style of leadership of Gary versus this other person, it was chalk and cheese. Gary was an inspiring leader. The other person was not that way. I was successful and gone on to do other things, but we couldn't work for them. It just wasn't working. The system, this is a warning for businesses that listen. The CEO and the CFO were interesting pair, and they said to us, Graham, well done this month. You're a hero. And you've made great numbers. But Jonathan, in the other organization, Graham was consulting, I was board executive coaching, you're a 0 because your numbers aren't as good as Graham. But last month, Jonathan, you were the hero and Graham was a 0. And then the CEO, that was the CFO, and then the CEO would go, guys, I think you all need to collaborate and cross-sell more. And we went, yeah, okay. And if I knew someone in the search business would give work to another search business rather than to his peer because they were all being compared to each other. And if his peer did better than him, he got more of a bonus. Like how crazy is that? So we were actually all competing with each other. So when he then put one of the 6 in competition in charge of other 2, it was never going to work. It was set up to fail.
If that hadn't happened, if the restructure hadn't happened, do you think you would have gone and set up your own business at some point anyway, or was it just a delay, or
no, I think it forced
would it have never
me.
happened?
I think it forced me, and I think this is why when one door closes or something happens to you, you go, okay, what have I learned? What am I going to do now? What? And this is where interviewing Navy SEALs is so fascinating. There's one poor guy who got shot through the throat and it paralyzed him. You definitely need to have a listen to his story. And it's also in the CEO's Compass. It begins with his story. And that is what they always go, okay, he was SBS. Now what? What are you going to do? Guy's been shot. What are you going to do? Get the helicopter in, that kind of stuff. And it's the same here as an entrepreneur. Something changes. And it take me back to the military. We call it mission analysis. Has the situation changed? If it has, so what? What are friendly forces doing, enemy forces? What's the weather like? And what's my part in 2 up, 1 up and the plan? So you're constantly reviewing the situation because it's very fluid. And suddenly something's dropped down. So I think in business, it's the same. When something changes, and this is where the Buddhists say impermanence, do not be attached to something. I was quite comfortable. It was an easy sort of life. If it carried on unchanged for a while, I might have stayed and become a millionaire when Adecco bought Penna. As it was, I left before that moment, and I'm still glad I didn't. I'm glad I've had this experience rather than becoming a millionaire in an organization where I was already starting to feel the way the organization was going didn't agree with my values. And so actually, if your values are in conflict, you need to go and do your own thing.
So this is fascinating. So you, in the end, you did go and set up the business, but partly through force of circumstances. But was your ability there in that situation down to the fact that I don't want to link things unnaturally, but you've had this training, the army training, you've had an early spell in consulting, you're at Penna, and is your ability in that situation to be able to assess and make decisions quickly about whether something would be right or wrong? Because some people might have just said, I'll give it a go. I'll see what it's like working under this person. I don't really particularly want that to happen. But it sounds to me as though you were very quick to assess, process, and make a decision. Is that making a natural link, a false link, or is
No,
that true?
I think it's a fair one because in war fighting, you haven't got long. You have to quickly assess the situation. Situation has changed. Now what? And so that was what happened. The restructure happened. I found the way it was going, the organization didn't fit with my values. If you're in an organization and your values and the organization's values are in conflict, you have to get out. Because if you cannot sign up to this is what we're going to do, I think I unfortunately used the words I'm underwhelmed when we had a strategy day and left the room to go and catch the train home. That was a bit of a cruel thing, and I had to apologize afterwards to Gary and the facilitator because it was a bit of an unpleasant thing to say. But I was really saying I don't buy into this. But actually, I got a good challenge. Remember Sally Baxter? She was great. She was my number two, and I went back and I had a whinge about it to the team. And she went, Jonathan, did you say that to the CEO and the others? And I went, no, I just said I'm underwhelmed. She said, so if you say that about them when they're not in the room, what do you say about us when we're not in the room? And I went, do you know what? I'm such a heel. And from that moment, I've always made this point of not triangulating, where you and I talk about Sally. Why don't I go and talk to Sally directly rather than us bitch about her? And this is where we need to challenge other people. Don't gossip about people, talk to them.
To them. Right. Right.
And that makes you trustworthy or not trustworthy.
Now, I want to move on to your podcast and to the book and, talking about talking to people. I mean, I'm looking at your guest list that you've got on your podcast. It's a guest list to die for, really. You've got them in your book. You've sort of listed them out. It's fantastic. 400, I think, sort of now with the great and the good from lots of sort of areas. Let's talk about that. Why did you set that up? Was there a clear strategy sort of behind that in terms of developing the business? For me, in my podcast, it started off as something I was just curious. I just wanted to do things, and then it developed into part of my business. What was your motivation at the start? And we'll talk about that, and then we'll get on to the book.
I think it goes back to my father. My father's motto was "Don't die with the music still in you," and I wanted, and I still do, and it's in the book. You probably read it. I want to positively influence the lives of people I may never meet, as many as possible. For me, it's how can I influence certain leaders who are going to have the greatest positive impact, the cascade effect, the trickle down on the largest number of people in the world. And I decided that in the limited time I've got, and as you've read in the book, it actually turned out to be more limited than I thought. I want to work with the CEOs of very large multinationals and big organizations so that they will be good leaders, inspiring leaders, and treat their people well, who they in turn will inspire others and so on. So that is why I deliberately targeted the CEOs. And also because I'd worked for the head of the army as his assistant, I was very comfortable with really senior people. They didn't faze me. Whereas other people often feel a bit intimidated or they kowtow to them or suck up to them. I actually call them out. Like I had a group the other day I was facilitating and I go, guys, you're the top people in this organization and you're annoyed the CEO's micromanaging you because he doesn't trust you. I don't trust you. You can't even turn up on time to each of these sessions. And yet we agreed ways of working at the beginning that you would show respect to each other by turning up on time. And you can't do that. So I can't trust you either. And they were, oh, yeah, yeah, sorry, we'll really do it. And after lunch, 19 of them came back on time.
Yes.
One of them didn't. And he turned up 5 minutes later. I said, I don't normally make an example of someone, but come here, I'm going to make an example of you. What happened? Help me understand. What was your intent? Oh, I had to make a call. Yeah, we all have to make calls. But you had committed and given me a thumbs up that you were going to be back at 2 o'clock. And I trusted you to be back at 2 o'clock, and you broke that trust. So how are we going to trust you on anything if you can't even get a start at 2 o'clock right? Oh, yeah. Well, how about you make a contribution to a charity of your choice? Which charity do you support? I don't support charity. Okay, well, you do now. You're going to support the Inspiring Leadership Foundation, helping the victims of violence against women and girls. And I will send you the details. So I sent him the details and the head of their organization. She's contributed. Don't think he has yet because he can't be trusted.
Okay. That's just really interesting in terms of the also there is a contagion issue around that if somebody is behaving in that way, and then I'm imagining these are very senior people who have their own teams, and the impact that has on the behavior of the teams there. So through your podcast, you're speaking to very high performing individuals, and that must have a huge ripple effect, I would imagine, on those who are listening and so on. Let's talk about the book, because you alluded to it just now. It's called The CEO's Compass: How to Navigate Your Team Through Turbulent Times. And I want to start at the beginning on this. You start with, you have 10 years left to live. And just take us through that. For people, there'll be people who haven't read this book, and so on. Give me some context and how that sort of came about and what that meant.
I'm going to leave people to listen to the audiobook and to read the book, because I want them to do that. So I'm actually not going to spoil the story. They're going to need to read it. But the point is, when you've got a burning why, you can cope with any what or how. And that's Sun Tzu in his teaching, and also Marcus Aurelius and some of the other great people. And so I have an urgency. And when I got the news, I realized I've been talking about doing my third book for some time. And people have said, you've had some great people on the podcast from, my favorite, I think, is Admiral Bill McRaven, the Navy SEAL. 10 million people have watched his first Make Your Bed. Anthony Scaramucci, Trump's, your opposite number, really, in the day you used to do. And he said, I said, so you lasted 10 days. He said, oh, come on, John, be fair. 11 days. Don't run me out of one day, 11 days. But he said, I got chainsawed at the age of 53, and it really was humbling. What a lovely, lovely man. But he admitted before he was quite arrogant, and, everything had gone his way. So he learned a lot from that. So all these amazing people, and it's my give back. Many people doing podcasts monetize it, make lots of money from it. I don't. I just get to meet really interesting people, and many of them ask me to be their coaches afterwards. So in a way, it turns out to be part of my sort of way of meeting more interesting people, because each of the inspiring leaders that I have recommend to other people that they find inspiring. So whenever agencies approach me, I nearly always say no, because they have a conflict of interest. They are trying to suggest, Trevor, I've got this great person to go on your podcast. And you go, well, why are you recommending them? Oh, they're really good. Are they paying you to tell me they're really good? Yes, they are paying me to sell them to you. I said, no, don't want them. So, but if you, Trevor, said to me, Jonathan, I've got these two CEOs that I know, and they are the most inspiring leaders I know, and I'd like you to say that they're, I recommended them. That's great. And so I got good people, gave me even more inspiring people. And so it trickled on. And I began with the military because I knew some of them. And then it spread to people they knew in business. And I also began with some of my coaching clients, then people who have become coaching clients. So I've met some wonderful people. And my give back is this, just paying this back into society. And all I ask is that they recommend somebody else who's inspiring.
you've very skillfully not only answered that question there, but you've also managed to sort of do an implicit spoiler alert, that I was trying to lead you to in my question. So yes, go and buy the book, listen to the audiobook, folks. I also just want to say a thing about Scaramucci is he tells some, I'm sure he's told this story hundreds of times, where he says that Trump said something to him on a Wednesday. He knows it was a Wednesday because it was the only Wednesday he was in the job. And I just love it. He has developed this, sort of kind of playful humility, if you like, around himself, which is great. So he's kind of reinvented himself, if you like, from a very unpromising sort of situation. I want to, although we're not going to go, we will talk about the book, and I just want to say that I mean, the book, obviously it reflects the 8 points of a compass plus the true north. It's got loads of great stuff in there, great experiences. It's very logically and beautifully sort of set out, this book, and I'd say people would really get a lot out of looking at this. I was really struck by that side of things, but did you feel, as you were sort of writing about it, was the compass always in your mind? Because when some people write a book, they start off with a CEO's parabola or hexagon or something, and I mean, was the compass always there in your mind? How did it emerge?
It began when I was doing my first book, and I was working with a psychometrician, and we were looking at EQ and IQ and spiritual quotient in those days, and legacy. And so I began to build an early, 15 years ago, an early compass of a bit of a guide to people. And then Lee and I developed that further about 10 years ago, where we brought in health quotient, resilience, and also what we call collective collaborative intelligence, a bit about diversity, equality, inclusion, because IQ alone isn't a good marker of what makes high-performing teams. So the compass itself is something we use when we're assessing teams to see what will make a high-performing team and a high-performing leader. So it has quotients which are measurable, which goes with it. So there's a psychometric, there's a 360, there's a team tool that goes with this. And so when I was doing the interviews from episode 1 to we recorded this weekend, episode 400, Lee and I looking back over the 400 guests, and that will be going out around about Christmas time, is that was a lovely way of having a conversation with people, and they could all share stories about their values. They could share a story about resilience. They could share stories about health, which is often something that people never talk about, funny enough, on leadership programs. It's sort of forgotten as health, okay. And the legacy they're going to leave. And so it became naturally, that was the way to do it. And then from the interviews, I made use of AI. So I used Sonic's AI to take in the early days, before you could get transcriptions are everywhere. I created the transcriptions of it, put it into Google LM Notes. And from that, I said, what are the best stories from these different guests I've got? So I now have this oracle that I can ask it, what are the top 5 things that CEOs find as a problem? Out it comes. Because I've got 400 guests who give me opinions. On top of that, I've coached another 1,500 CEOs and their teams. So there's because I'm dyslexic and have dyscalculia, I love to learn auditory and visual like this with you. And so I'm happy to chat, but also because I was told I was thick and I was going to be a dustman, I have this desire to prove people that I have this encyclopedic memory, which I almost do. My father did have an encyclopedic memory. He could look at a whole naval manual about the working of the Buccaneer Mark I aircraft, and he could say, Trevor, on page 75, it says the following. And he would literally be able to read it from top of the page to the bottom. Right. I can't do that, but I can tell you, Marcus Aurelius said this, or Seneca said that, or there's a good book here, which read this one, or chapter 2 of this, or there's some resource over here. And so that is incredibly useful to CEOs when we're having a walking meeting together and they've shared their issues and dilemmas. And then I go, now I've listened to you for half an hour. Would you like my thoughts on your thoughts? Yeah. And they go, yeah. Okay, well, I was interested with this and that. Have you thought about this? What about that? What are you going to do about this? There's a resource here. You might want to use that. And they go, Now, what's your thoughts on my thoughts on your thoughts? And they go, oh, that's really interesting. And so now what are you going to do? And they go, I'm going to do this and this and this. And okay, that's great. And hold them to account. So it forms the basis of a very easy conversation.
Yeah, and I mean, I should explain to sort of listeners that as you're explaining some of these things, that you have these little moments where you're reaching out sort of mentally, if you like, and sort of you're drawing on an experience. So and so said this. So it's fascinating actually, not only hearing you tell these stories, but actually watching you tell the stories as well, because I can see almost like an encyclopedic knowledge of things, and it's although you talk about the use of technology and helping you do that, it's also coming from in there inside your head as well. So it's there's a sort of vast array of experiences that have gone into this book.
Well, you know very well, Trevor, as someone who's been in media, journalism, all the things that you've done. I've always remembered you're a fabulous storyteller, and I still think of some of the campaigns that you ran. That I still remember the campaigns that you ran, and you often had a little catchy headline in the days before AI because you'd thought of it, and meaning at work and things like this. All that research that you did, it was fabulous stuff, and I joined you with that. And it's primeval. We have godlike technology, medieval institutions, and Paleolithic emotions. And those Paleolithic emotions, that was E.O. Wilson. There you are. There's another one pulled out of Paduma, pulled directly out of my,
Yes, whatever.
The point about the Paleolithic emotions is we relied on storytelling. So the fact that you're such a good journalist, storyteller, coach, podcaster is because you love telling stories.
Yeah.
And I love telling stories and bringing things to life. So I have all these vignettes, these little stories of when I got things, most of them are when I got things wrong. I mean, I made so many mistakes. That's why I've had to write a third book, because it's full of some of my mistakes. But what did I learn from that?
Yeah. And let's focus on the moment you are at now then. I mean, I turned up at your book launch and I just felt the love in the room, if you like. There's a bunch of people in there, packed house. And there's a lot of love for you and what you're doing and the book, and a lot of support there, and it was lovely actually. There was a lovely sort of atmosphere and vibe in all that. You've done a lot of things right to get to that point, if you like. Let's have maybe a few sort of things about here I am. I'm looking back. I don't know who told you you'd be a dustman, by the way, but I'd be fascinated if you built your teacher,
Miss Gibson,
right?
My
Okay,
teacher, yeah.
right, okay. And but if you look back on would-be dustman sort of now, and from where you are, I mean, what sort of lessons would you pass on to people who are maybe starting either on an entrepreneurial journey or a leadership journey? And are there sort of regrets thrown in there that that you'd say, I wish I hadn't done this, as well as I'm glad I did do that?
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. Pick your mentors, pick your coaches, pick your ambassadors, and be open to learning from anywhere. Everybody you meet has something to teach you if only you'd listen to them, was what my mother would say. And she's now long passed. But even when I worked for the head of the army, who was thoroughly unpleasant character, but very successful, it was almost like being in an abusive relationship, because he was so tough on you. And I remember we had a flight, he and I, with his other assistant. I was the aide de camp, it was called. And we were flying to Southern Africa. I think we were going to Botswana. We were traveling first class. We'd gone into the British Airways lounge, special VIP, taken as the last people onto the airplane, up into first class. Wow. Glass of champagne, sir, this kind of stuff. And he could see I was enjoying myself. And being the dark triad, narcissistic, subclinical psychopath, and Machiavellian, he didn't want me to enjoy myself. So he'd go, Jonathan, make some notes for me on, and he made something up. So he didn't want me to sit back and relax. We went to visit the SAS. We flew in a private helicopter like James Bond, from the top building in London. The helicopter landed on the top. We climbed into it, flew all the way to Hereford, met by the CEO of the SAS, driven around in dark cars, evasive driving, and all sorts of cool stuff. Went into the killing room, when Maggie Thatcher had been taken and the royal family, and guys were firing bullets around us and killing targets near us, and it was live bullets firing in the room. All these amazing experiences, and then we went and sat in the briefing room, and this is like the moment where he gets briefed on what had gone on, what the special forces had been doing in the first Iraq War, and I sat, as I always did, a couple of seats away from him, and he goes, "What are you doing sitting here? Go to the back of the room." It's like, this is an empty cinema. For a briefing for him and his assistant who's come with him, I was the bag carrier. So I had to go and sit on the back row, still get the same briefing. I wasn't sent out the room, but he didn't want me to sort of get too confident. He always loved keeping you unsettled. And that's not the way to lead people. The way to lead people is the way that Richard Dannett led people, or John Griffin, or John Stoker, which is catching you doing things right, encouraging you, looking for your strengths. And when you haven't done something right, what have you learned? What are you going to do now? And that stayed with me ever since. I've learned a lot about how to lead people. I've also learned, and we see this in many of the politicians, certainly President of America and people like Boris Johnson. That's not how not to lead. But that seems to be the age of the strong man, and lack of diversity, equality, inclusion, and white supremacy, and all those kind of things. That seems to be the way ahead, and a rumbling war coming with Putin.
Mm-hmm. So, and I mean, that's a fascinating answer in terms of, the way in which you lead has been sort of like a kind of thread, if you like, through your career. I've got to ask you about the MBE as well. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's obviously a sort of a source of pride. Just tell us a bit about that. I mean, in a way, it's. I mean, I'm sure it's a great honour and so on. But just tell me a bit more about what it means to you, and first of all, what did you get it for, and what it actually means.
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a story with this, as you'd expect. So I'm in the headquarters trying to be the chief staff of this massive brigade. All the people on the Roll of Honour board have become generals and got lots of honours and titles. And there I am, just a lowly major, trying to do what I'm doing. And I'm overwhelmed. I'm trying to do everybody's job. And they come in with a problem. I say, leave it with me. And then somebody teaches me about coaching, the T-GROW model. Trevor, you'd know that. Topic, goal, reality, option, willing to act. I started using that. And soon I was the metaphorical sort of albatrosses I had hanging around my neck. I was able to elevate and empower other people to solve them themselves. So I then had time to think about the bigger picture because I wasn't micromanaging. And that gave me time to stand at the window, look out and think, where are we going next year with the brigade, and what should we be doing this, and how can I help the brigade commander to lead a good brigade? Get this phone call and they go, can you provide half of your headquarters to be detached to go to Australia to help the Australians as they prepare to combat the East Timor massacre that's going on? We need to train them as peacekeepers so that they can go in with the lessons that we've got from Bosnia and Northern Ireland and work with the Canadians, the Americans, the New Zealanders and the Australians in a big exercise to pass over the knowledge and skills. Had I been asked that at the beginning of my time there, I would have gone, hey, look, I can't even do my day job. Why would I want to do this? But now, through coaching and elevating and empowering other people to think for themselves, I had lots of spare time. And I went, yeah, we can do this. Bit of a risk, but I thought, yeah, we can do this. And we all went. We got given more people from around the British Army. We went and trained them. It was a great success. They went to East Timor. They prevented the militias massacring people. They brought peace through the UN to what went on. And I then went to see the Queen at the palace and become a member of the British Empire. And it's something I'm very proud of because it wasn't just me. It was the team around me. So no one is a self-made man or woman. You always stand on the shoulders of giants. And I had great people in my headquarters and I could trust them and I relied on them. And I could leave a home team behind for the 3 months we were away while we went to Australia to train up the others. And it's something which has stayed with me ever since.
Final question from me then. What will happen in terms of leadership in 2026? Is there a sort of evolution of leadership or a revolution in leadership? I mean, how will leadership change?
This is why I call the subtitle How to Navigate Your Team Through Turbulent Times. This is going to be even more turbulent. Tomorrow is not a slower day. This is as slow as it will ever be. The pace is going to pick up and it's going to get frenetic. People will be overwhelmed by the level of the change that's required in industry. There'll be a lot of jobs that will be lost. AI will restructure what goes on, just like the Luddites will try and break the spinning jennies and some of the machines that brought speedier processes. People won't like the change, but people will have to adapt to it because it's this non-attachment and the impermanence of things. As the Buddhists would always say, there's massive impermanence. Nothing's going to stay the same. I even have on my list of things to do, my milestone priorities for 25, and they're going to change. But I put at the bottom there, shed 80% of what I do every year. Shed 80%. Because you have to make space. You have to stop doing list to make space for the things that are coming in and that you're ready for it. And we've got war coming with Russia. We're at war with Russia already. So Russia is a malevolent force. You know, you've seen the same with Iran, North Korea. China's going to be taking Taiwan, those kind of things. There's going to be the Third World War of variations going on in 26 and 27. So we've got to be ready for a really turbulent time where really good leadership is more important than ever. These strong men who bully, intimidate, belittle people, that's not good leadership. And you get fear and intimidation, but you don't get people willingly giving discretionary life energy to those leaders. They'll do it because they're afraid of their lives or their jobs, but they do it and they resent it. So you want good leaders and you want inspiring leaders.
And that's how the interview ended with Jonathan. I don't know about you, but the importance of inspiring leadership in the world right now was a sobering one as we entered 2026 with so many disturbing events going on around the world. Jonathan brings a rare combination of lived experience, deep reflection and practical wisdom to the subject, and what stood out for me was his emphasis on calm in the midst of chaos. The idea that great leaders create stability, not by having all the answers, but by staying grounded, asking great questions and trusting the people around them. I was also struck by how openly he talks about his personal career transition, whether that means leaving the army or moving into business or stepping out to build his own work. Jonathan makes the case for preparation, self-awareness and learning from every setback along the way. And his reflections on humility, trust and responsibility, to me, feel very relevant at a time when leadership is really being tested on many, many fronts. As he puts it, turbulence isn't going away, but how leaders show up in those moments really, really matters. So thank you to Jonathan and thank you to all of our listeners and for the great feedback we're getting on the show as we go into the new year. If you enjoyed this episode, we'd love for you to subscribe, rate and review through your usual podcast provider. And if you want to find out more about the Merri-Cast, look for me, Trevor Meriden, or on LinkedIn or on our business page, merriborn@merriborn.co.uk. And until next time, thanks for listening.